Hey everybody, welcome back to the Optometry Money Podcast, where I'm helping ODs make better and better decisions around your money, your career, and your practice. Today's episode, we have an awesome guest, Erich Mattei, President and Chief Vision Officer of Akrinos, an optometric private practice consulting firm. And I am your host, Evon, certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors. Thank you so much for listening. And in today's episode, Erich and I talk all about cold starts. And Erich is just a wealth of knowledge and information and wisdom about this whole process. Erich talks to us about whether optometrists can still be successful today, starting practices cold. He walks us through the whole process from idea to doors open and everything in between. And he gives us some clear action items at the end to take away here. So if you're an optometrist thinking about starting a practice cold, if you've recently started cold, this is for you. And I'll have Erich's contact information and company website in the show notes. So go ahead and check out the show notes. Check out Erich and his company, Akrinos. And without further ado, here's my interview with Erich Mattei. And welcome back, everyone, to the Optometry Money Podcast. I am your host, Evon Mindrin, and I am here with a very special guest. I am pleased to have on the show Mr. Erich Mattei, President, Chief Vision Officer of Akrinos. Erich, thank you so much for joining us.
Evon, I got to tell you, man, it is a sincere pleasure to be here. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, appreciate having on. And I am excited to dive into everything cold starts with you, because you, in your work and experience, have taken ODs through that whole process of basically from idea to doors open and everything in between. So I think the listeners, whether it's an optometrist thinking about cold starting or someone who's just recently opened up their doors, I think there's a lot we can learn from you here. So I'm excited to dig in.
Excellent, man. Excellent.
And before we dive in, can you give us, just for people who aren't familiar with you or Akrinos, just give us a quick background of who is Akrinos, what is your background, and what led to you doing the work that you do now?
Sure, definitely. So as far as who Akrinos is, what we are, right? We are today's practice management consultants. And we have a very simple goal, Evon, right? Our goal is to help optometrists achieve their personal and professional goals in private practice. Now you think about that and you think, wow, it sounds kind of simple, but I think we all know, both yourself, myself, and all of our listeners out there, we know that quite frankly, growing and thriving in private practice eye care today is more challenging than ever, right? So in the context of that, our goal is to, again, work with established practice owners, work with cold starts, work with doctors at various stages of their practice life cycle to really help them get the most out of their practice, right? Grow a thriving practice that's really hitting on their goals. And whether those goals have to do with profitability, whether those goals have to do with efficiency, whether those goals have to do with business transition. What we're doing here at Akrinos is building a remarkable team with exceptional experienced talent from across the industry to deliver those results to our clients.
Awesome. Yeah, and I love that. I think the more resources there are for private practice today, the better off the profession as a whole is going to be. So I think that's awesome that you're doing the work you're doing. And let's chat about cold starts. And you mentioned the challenge of building private practice in today's environment. And I don't think you have to go far to find reasons why you shouldn't cold start practices. You can go into forums, you can start talking to other optometrists, and whether it's the grip that vision plans have on private practice, whether it's the effect of consolidation or private equity, whether it's perceived complexity around building practices now, I don't think you have to go far to start hearing those reasons. And so in your experience, in the work that you're doing, what is the landscape like right now for cold starts? What are the prospects like for cold starting practices today and beyond? I mean, should ODs still look to this as an option in their careers?
Is this a joke?
Hey, I lined that one up for you. Let's just put that on the tee.
I absolutely love it, Evon, because look, the fact of the matter is this, and I know you and I were talking about this pretty recently, and you and I are both very active in a variety of online communities. And the fact is that, yes, there's a lot of dynamic change going on out there, not only in eye care, but in healthcare as a whole. Yeah. And the fact is, what we've come to discover is it's kind of like, you kind of fall into one of two realms of thought. One, dynamic change is a threat to me and my future. Or two, dynamic change presents new opportunities for me and my future. It's kind of as simple as that, right? So that being said, obviously we are of the belief that this dynamic change in the future is creating some of the most remarkable opportunities that our industry has seen in a very long time. And I suppose the best way to kind of serve it up, right? And I will invite all of you listeners out there who maybe yourself right now, you're going back and forth inside. You've got one voice in your head that's saying, hey, go for it. You got that other voice in your head saying, hey, look, it's not meant to be. Consider this for one moment. Public health need across vision and medical eye care continues to increase at a radical rate. And quite frankly, we see that there's absolutely no end in sight for this. And we know this because, quite frankly, lifestyle choices, environmental factors, and longevity are continuing to drive up that need for, again, routine vision and medical eye care. Look, a really good perfect case in point is just look at the population of children in a school that these days need vision correction compared to, say, 25, 30 years ago when I was in grade school, right? Like, I remember at the time, there were only a handful of students in my class in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, only a handful of them that needed vision correction. Well, when I look at my children and their peers, and they're in the 6th grade and 5th grade respectively, I mean, you're talking about darn near upwards of a third, if not a half of that pupil population that are needing vision correction, right? So once again, I mean, whether we're looking at the need for routine vision correction, or we're looking at this escalating need for medical eye care, right? Again, lifestyle choices, environmental factors, the obesity epidemic. I mean, we could just like start to go down this list of so many factors that are continuing to increase public health need for medical eye care. So, I always like to start this conversation around the opportunity that is in cold start. I always like to start it by really inviting everyone to put in context what the public health needs are. Because again, when we realize that lifestyle choices, environmental factors, and longevity are continuing to increase that need for routine vision and medical eye care, and then you look at the degree to which private practice eye care is best positioned to adopt innovative approaches, maintain agility in this changing dynamic marketplace that doctors are operating in. And again, I would say from my perspective, there's no better time to jump into private practice than right now.
That's awesome to hear, because I agree with that. And for those who want to take on that challenge of business ownership, and for those who are able to do it and are prepared to do it, I agree that cold starting and owning your own private practice can be an incredible, rewarding experience and opportunity for you to be able to dictate, essentially take control over your life and your time throughout your career, to be able to have control and creative freedom over the business you're building and the patient experience. And from a financial standpoint, if successful, business ownership can be a substantial way to improve your wealth over your career over the long term. So I think it can be a substantial opportunity for anyone who wants to take that opportunity and all the challenges that come with it in growing and starting a private practice, even if from cold. So I think that's awesome to hear, Eric. And for those thinking about, like, should I own a private practice? Should I remain an associate? Should I go into corporate? Like, in your experience, who would you say is a good fit for cold starting a practice? Like, what are the things they should be thinking about as they weigh that decision?
That's a really good question. And Evon, in my years around this industry, I have come to realizing that if you, that doctor, have even the slightest inkling of going into private practice, I will tell you right now, you can do it, you will do it, and you will succeed in doing it, right? See, prior to launching Akrinos, I've actually been around the industry for a number of years, and prior to launching Akrinos, or being invited to join Akrinos, was worked with a major vendor in our industry. So as such, got the opportunity to meet doctors truly all over the country at all different points of their practice life cycle. And I can't tell you how many doctors I interacted with where perhaps I first came to know them where they were an employed doctor, an associate doctor, maybe they were a lease owner in that type of practice setting. And remember many of them to this day. As a matter of fact, many of them got right here on my speed dial. Remember that first time that they shared with me, hey, Eric, I'm kind of thinking about this. What are your thoughts? And it's really amazing to reflect and see where they have all gotten today. And realizing that, it started with just that simple thought, that simple dream, right? That spark. And for those that are willing to put in the time, I just about guarantee you will find yourself at 1, 3, 5 years looking back and wondering, for some, why did I wait so long to do this? And as a matter of fact, I was talking to someone very recently who's at this stage. They're now really hitting that stride with their private practice. They were cold start, and they're like, wow. It's like, hey, doc, if you could change anything, what would you change? And every last one of them was like, man, I would have done this years ago, right? So I say that from the standpoint to answer your question, who is a candidate to successfully get into private practice? And I would argue that if the thought has even crossed your mind, you've got what it takes. However, you must be committed to the process because it is a process.
Yeah. And I would say, just from my own experience and having talked with people who started businesses inside of optometry and outside, is that if you're thinking about it now, you're going to continue to think about it. And it's just going to continue to weigh on your mind. And that itch is not going to go away until you've at least tried scratching it a little bit. So I agree, if you're thinking about it, kick the tires, look into the process, at least try to put these thoughts and visions and ideas on paper and see what it would take. And if at the end of that process, you still decide it's not something you want to do, or if it's not feasible, you've at least explored that and given yourself the opportunity to say no to that. So I love that answer. And you talked about the process. So someone decides they want to do that. Like what is the process to cold start a practice? What goes into that?
How much time do we have, Evon?
I cut it at 5 hours, so we got about 4.5 more.
We're going to cut it 5.
Yeah.
No, hey, look, what we're going to do today is we're going to keep it kind of high level, but I will invite everyone as we're going through this process, as Evon and I are now going to have this conversation about exactly what the process looks like. Take some notes, revisit this podcast, put the time in, reach out to your peers, reach out to Evon, reach out to myself. So we are going to keep this very high level, but know that it's when you start to really dig into these granular areas of each of these phases of the cold start process that you come to really see that blueprint come together and see that vision manifest itself to reality. So that being said, you're going to want to look at the cold start process as 3 phases, right? And those 3 phases are pretty simple, right? There's the planning phase, there's the development phase, and there's the launch phase, okay? So again, keeping it very rather high level, your planning phase is going to consist of financial forecast, feasibility analysis, constructing your business plan, really digging deep into yourself as a provider, as a visionary for your private practice, what truly is the scope of care that you would like to provide in your community. So those are the types of things you dig into in the planning phase. And mind you, Evon, we can visit each of these phases more in depth. I'll start with just kind of intro high level, right? So your planning phase is where we're starting to get ideas on paper, composing your business plan, developing your financial forecast and feasibility analysis, developing your master budget 1.0. And I cannot stress that enough. That master budget needs to start somewhere, but it also becomes a living, breathing tool as well, right? So the planning phase, the goal here is really to put in all of the all of the work, the elbow grease, as my late grandfather would say, put in the elbow grease to position you to be able to go sit down with a bank and start talking about what type of financing you can secure. Okay. So that's going to be phase one, is the planning phase, right? From there, we then venture into phase two. And phase two of your cold start process is the development phase, right? So this is where you take what was originally set out in blueprint in your planning phase, and what were some very conservative estimates structured within your financial forecast and feasibility analysis. And the development phase is where the stuff starts to become a bit more concrete. The development phase is composed of two key areas, those being your office location and build out. And look, we could have a 5-hour conversation purely centered around, the optimal location for a practice based on local socioeconomic trends and a whole wealth of research that really goes into kind of finding what is that ideal location, right? But it doesn't stop there, because not only it's finding a location, but then building out and optimizing the design of your office to fit, again, that scope of care that you're wanting to provide. The other key piece of that development phase, right? So where you got office location and build out, that other key piece has to do with technology and equipment, right? So this, once again, is all a reflection of your vision for your practice and that scope of care, right? Obviously, a boutique dry eye specialty day spa with independent optical offerings is going to be created radically different from that family routine and medical eye care with an emphasis on pediatrics and myopia control, right? So when you get into this development phase, this is where you're taking what was originally structured in your planning, in your business plan, all the financial modeling. Then you're taking that step into starting to create the concrete business in the context of the office, in the context of the technologies and equipment that you're building the space out with. So what started as planning and then transitions into development, right? As this development process is taking place, then you start to really focus on this third piece, which is all about launch. And the launch of your practice revolves around your standard operating procedures, your people, and your marketing strategy. And see, it's interesting as we're having this conversation, Evon, and I'm noticing myself, and I want to encourage the listeners to not think of these three phases as sort of these clearly defined components where like there's a line in the sand where you cross the step into one phase. Because the fact of the matter is this: to collaborate with that emerging private practitioner today and to be having conversations on how we're going to get them to opening 12, perhaps 9, perhaps as soon as 6 months from now, right? And by the way, there are a lot of variables that play into exactly how long it will take to launch, right? But understand that it's in the context of that process that these phases to some degree will overlap, right? And particularly when you're talking about development and launch, right? So while this development phase is unfolding and your practice is coming to reality, you've got the contractors involved, renovating your space. We've got equipment being sourced. It's really starting to see things take shape within the physical office. It's imperative that we focus on that launch piece, right? Mm-hmm. Your standard operating procedures, which must be addressed, documented, and aligned on prior to recruiting and training your people, right? We don't want to be making decisions while we're the first day we've got people in the job. We want to have all that stuff already in line, already documented, right? Transition to bringing on people, which also includes human resource and that kind of whole world, which is a for some, it's not a very exciting world. Fortunately for us, we've got a great team with great people that are proficient in those areas, right? So getting all the HR house in order, then training your people in your standard operating procedures. And in the context of all of this, also have your marketing strategy really take flight. And that's something we have observed better sooner rather than later, right? So like when we're working with clients, I mean, when we're looking at like 90 days from launch, yeah, we're starting to really get into developing that marketing strategy, building that digital presence, kind of all these things that play into having you hit the ground and delivering what we call the high velocity launch.
Got it. Yeah, and I can imagine that as you're opening doors, you want to already be a well-oiled machine operationally. Like you said, you want to have those operating procedures and training done ahead of time, and you're ready to market as those doors are opening. And one of my questions was going to be, how long does that take? And you mentioned there's a lot of variables that fit into that. It could be anywhere from 6 months to 12 months, maybe even further out. Let's dig into these a little bit more.
Absolutely.
When you talk about planning, the planning phase and getting that business plan out and getting your vision, how detailed is that vision typically when you're first starting to get this business plan on paper? I have heard of some cold starts start out intentionally from the very beginning, knowing the specialties they want to serve and having such a clear, vivid picture. Others may not have that clear idea at the very beginning. I mean, how detailed is that business plan and that vision? Does that vision need to be from the very beginning?
Okay. That's a really great question. Because it brings up basically 2 points that no one should ever forget. And point number one, creating that business plan, putting the work into composing your business plan, putting the work into creating the financial modeling, right? Putting in that work, there's a direct correlation between how much work was put in and how well we hit the ground running, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's kind of, let me put it in this context, Evon. The degree of effort and detail that is put into those first stages, the business plan and the financial forecast and feasibility analysis, there's a direct correlation between how thorough these are and how smoothly the rest of the process goes, right?
Got it.
So that being said, it then brings up the second key point, and that is to be aware that all of this is an organic experience. When we talk about composing a business plan, when we talk about developing a marketing strategy, when we talk about creating your financial projections, right? Establishing that master budget, right? These things are not done and then hard pressed. They're not carved into stone, if you will. They are truly living, breathing analyses, living, breathing documents that will evolve with your practice, through the cold start process to launch, and will also evolve with your practice even once you get into practicing, right? There's a lot of similarity between the cold start and that practice who is an established practice, but perhaps wants to add a specialty to their practice. Maybe they want to add a second or even a third location to the practice, right? So you'll see that there's a lot of these things that are kind of some of these standard planning and kind of strategic development and analysis components that are imperative for making these steps, making these strides to grow the business.
And when you mentioned you move on from the planning phase, then you start to budget, put the numbers down, make sure the idea is feasible, and then you go to lending. What does it look like to prepare? Well, let's start with this question. What does the typical cost look like all in a cold start? And what does it look like to then prepare yourself to get lending for this whole project? What goes into that?
That is a remarkable question, Evon. And the reason being is because the startup cost is going to be a direct reflection of what that scope of care is that the doctor is wanting. So, and it kind of harkens back to that earlier question you asked as well. Like, to what degree do you kind of have to have your mind made up on things? Well, look, a perfect case in point. I mean, I can think of there are 2 clients right now that come to mind that are wanting to do two radically different things in their practice. Also, the spaces that we found, these ideal locations that we're leasing for each of these, are needing two radically different renovations, right? So there can be a pretty big sweep between $250,000 or $300,000 need for a startup, and then a $450,000 to $500,000 need for a startup. It's all going to be a reflection of what is that scope of care that you, the doctor, is going to want in the practice, right? The second is going to be, to what extent is that office, the renovations, right? What is the extent of the cost of build out of the space, right? And then third is also going to be based on location, right? So certainly, where we are here in South Louisiana, radically different cost of goods for build out, and we're working with contractors on building spaces out. That cost per square foot compared to some other markets where it may be easily 1.5 or 2 times more. So it's
like California.
Oh, like California. Yep. Yes, absolutely. So to answer your question, those costs can vary a whole lot. But here's the deal. And this is where these exercises like the financial forecast and feasibility analysis and composing the business plan, this is where these things really come into play, right? So look, Evon, I don't know if you've seen it. I know I've witnessed it in some of the online communities and some of the professional communities that we're so grateful to be a part of. Seeing community members drop an anonymous post into an online community. Hey, I'm looking to start my practice. The bank approved me, but they approved me for $100,000 less than I needed to start my practice. What am I to do? And I tell you, Evon, my heart breaks when I see posts like that. And I say that from the standpoint that I know what we have been able to help clients get in going through the process, right? Taking the time, investing the money, and going through the process, so that when you're sitting down with the bank, you've got everything that they're going to want to see and a beautiful story to support that, right? So there's a huge difference. And as a matter of fact, we recently had a conversation on that we had, as a matter of fact, the videos out there on our YouTube channel, right? But we had a conversation with a very well-respected, very experienced banker in optometry business financing. And he actually he backed up that exact statement. Sure, there's a lot of things that go into underwriting, but a key critical piece is, what kind of story are you telling the bank? And if you've got the thorough, detailed financial forecast and feasibility analysis and business plan, that blueprint for your vision, and how a banker and their underwriting team is going to view that, as opposed to a couple of pages and a very simple spreadsheet that has a couple of generic numbers that you Googled, right? There's a clear difference there, and can have a huge bearing on exactly what type of financing you're going to qualify for.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. As a cold start, as a new business, the only thing they have to evaluate is you and the story you're bringing to the table. There's no historical financials to look back into. There's no profitability to look back into. It's you and how prepared you are with your business plan, with your goals and your vision and the feasibility report and location, knowing how you're going to allocate these resources that they're going to lend to you. That's all they have to evaluate. And so I can see how important that is, and also see how these putting the work up front in this and getting this business plan down on paper, how that affects all these other decisions, how it affects the location, how it affects frame inventory, frame lines, how it affects everything, and how you start to use these dollars that are lent to you. So I can see how important that is in getting that work done up front, to try to make that as clear as it possibly can be. Absolutely.
And again, I'll remind you, it serves two purposes, right? because right here we're talking, I know right now specifically we're talking right now about financing, okay? It secures the financing, but now also it then informs the process moving forward.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it really, the degree to which it eliminates headaches from the process of that cold start doctor, it is absolutely enormous.
Yeah. Fascinating. And just something I'll add for the listeners out there thinking about going through this process and preparing for lending, preparing your own personal finances is a big part of this. Making sure you have a plan to cover your own living expenses for the first couple of years is a part of this. The lender's going to want to know that this deal is going to cash flow, that they're going to be able to see you cover your living expenses and to cover the payments on that loan. So it's important for a few reasons to cover your living expenses and know how you're going to do that. Number one is you can't draw from this new business to cover your living expenses. That business is not going to be able to support your lifestyle initially. I mean, Erich, how long would you say you've seen from doors open until how many years or months before that doctor's actually able to start drawing a salary from that business?
Well, it's interesting. We were talking a little while ago earlier in our conversation about, is now the time to venture into private practice? Is now the time to cold start a private practice? Yeah. And you'll recall I shared with you, there's never been a better time. And the reason why I say that is this. And to all you listeners out there, I will invite you, lean into one of your peers. If you are listening to this because you are aspiring to cold start a practice, I would invite you to go lean into one of your peers who is an established private practice owner. Particularly look for someone who opened upwards of 15 or 20 years ago. So look for someone who opened maybe 15, 20, 25 plus years ago, okay? Ask them what it was like starting out. Mm-hmm. Ask them what type of patient volume they had starting out. Ask them how often the phone was ringing. Ask them these different things. And quite frankly, what you'll come to realize is that ramp up period now in this modern time that we live in, at least from our perspective, because we look at this cold start process in a very holistic perspective. And we are huge. We are all about leveraging digital and leveraging tech. So when you take pause and reflect on that and see, oh yes, we have heard the stories of that cold start from 15 or 20 years ago where they spent a lot of days twiddling their thumbs or dusting their frame boards that were already dusted the day before. But how much of their time, how long that ramp up phase was, and you compare it to now, and when you have a structured, strategic marketing strategy in place, right? And that's why I share with you in the context of this. Notice that when we talk about cold start, we're not talking about just one little piece, but we're talking about this whole everything from vision to grand opening. An integral part of a successful grand opening is that strategic marketing plan, full omni-channel experience for patients, digital presence. This is a whole other 5-hour conversation to itself. But here's the deal. We can have realistic conversations with doctors about, hey, when we open, how many patients would we like to have on the book day one, right? See, and now mind you, you can't do that launching your website the week before your opening, right? But that gets back to some of these other things that I touched on in the cold start process. You come to realize that there comes to be a lot of moving parts that need to be addressed. And that marketing strategy comes to be a very, very important moving part when you're getting about 90 days from launch. Really start to, it's like pulling back a slingshot, right? Like pull that bad boy back, gearing ourselves up, but getting the message out there, right? And by the way, strategic marketing is not just a website. As a matter of fact, a website and digital presence is actually one small piece of a comprehensive marketing strategy. But all of these things go into empowering you as the cold start to hit the ground running.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I'll want to ask you about marketing and what a successful launch looks like. And just to wrap up my own thought there. You want to have a plan for covering living expenses. You want to make sure that you're not going to have to rely on the business early on, to draw resources out of the business early on. You want it to be on its own so that it can move to survival and then to thriving. You want to help lower your stress in a really important area in your own life. And you can help lower that stress by knowing how you're going to cover personal expenses. And then lastly, the lender is probably going to want to see a plan to cover your living expenses. Depending on what lender you go with, some I've heard are actually going to require you to associate a certain amount of days per week. Some lenders will lean more heavily on cash savings, but just as you prepare yourself for this new business, aim to create flexibility in your cash flow and to build liquidity for that in preparation for that. But one thing I wanted to ask you before we turn to what a successful launch looks like is, what are maybe the 2 to 3 things that are most important about picking a location? Because the location seems to be one of the most critical parts of opening an optometry practice, is figuring out where you're going to go. So what are some of the biggest things to look at there?
Sure. Yeah. 3 key pieces. Number 1, it starts with your vision, right? So the emerging practice owner that's starting to think about their cold start, right? What type of care do you want to provide, right? So that's number 1, right? So it starts with scope of care, vision for scope of care. Number 2 then is a matter of assessing and identifying those locations that would best suit that scope of care that you are wanting to provide, right? Mm-hmm. And that then leads to the 3rd piece, which is all about getting back to something that we touched very early on in the conversation, which is what? The budget, the financial model. Okay. So it's those 3 things. And we're talking about finding the ideal location, right? And look, to use the fun technical lingo, geospatial analysis, right? So when we refer to geospatial analysis, it's the aggregate of those 3 things, right? It's what is your scope of care that you would like to provide. It's identifying the location that's going to have that population that is also seeking that care. And then to be sure that all of that works from our standpoint, all of that works from a dollars and cents, right? And I cannot stress enough, Evon, I cannot stress enough. If it seems like I am leaning a lot and constantly referencing financial forecast, feasibility analysis, master budget, business plan, if it seems like I keep referencing those, it's because that truly, the work that is put in there is going to determine so many things throughout that cold start process, right? Look, just talking about location, I mean, heaven forbid that we get to this point where we're seeking out a location and you don't exactly know what the scope of care is that you want. I mean, I can just think of our region down here. I can drop a 10-mile radius from my home here in Metairie, Louisiana, drop a 10-mile radius and think of pockets of that geography become radically different. And in these radically different pockets, what patients would be seeking in care is going to be radically different, right? So cannot stress enough, understand your vision and the scope of care you want, then identify that population in your market that is most seeking that care, and then all of the numbers have to make sense.
Yeah, and I've heard it is downright scary what you can learn from a geospatial analysis, the kind of data you can pull in.
Oh, so, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And look, there's a lot of really great resources out there as well. A lot of really great resources that are backed by U.S. Census data. So you can really, I mean, it's kind of a matter of how much time do you want to spend in front of the computer pulling numbers and doing research. But I would invite everyone to not be overwhelmed. You can easily go down the rabbit hole and be absolutely overwhelmed with the stuff. But look at those 3 key things. Focus on your scope of care. Focus on where in your region is the population that wants that scope of care. And then it's a matter of the dollars and cents.
Yeah. And in the spirit of, I would imagine starting up, you would want to try to keep fixed cost as lean as possible while still providing the scope of care that you're envisioning. So um, the lease is probably going to be a substantial portion of those fixed costs. What is an appropriate size of a practice of a building in a cold start like that? And then what is the length of a lease that you'd want to try to go for when you're just starting out?
Those are two really great questions. And again, we are going to go back to scope of care and vision for the practice. The reason why this is so important is because when you're looking at a lease, you're going to be looking at a 5 to 10 year lease. Typically, you'll want to do a 5-year lease, and you can go research. There's a ton of stuff out there in the internet. A lot of things that kind of support the role of that 5-year lease. But that being said, understand that where you're starting on day one is far from where you'll be at the end of year 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, I shared with you earlier in our conversation that I know a lot of doctors across the country that have cold started, and in revisiting them years into their entrepreneurial journey of practice ownership, one of the most common things I hear is by about that 3-year mark, they're outgrowing their space. And
Interesting.
It is interesting. It's in part exciting. It's also in part an enigma, right? Like, try to figure out how do you structure it so that everything kind of lines up. Like, hang on, let me take a step back. I would like all of our listeners to be aware that when you speak with someone who says we're running out of space, understand you've hit capacity, right? If you run out of space, you have hit capacity, which means your growth trajectory lacks growth. or should I say, it may be more challenging to find growth opportunities. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's this balancing act. And this goes back to your question about what is the ideal space, right? Because it becomes this balancing act. Really, the ideal is where you find a way where you can have a space that you won't outgrow, but at the same time, on those front years that you're really ramping up, isn't going to be too costly, right? I mean, it really is like this is a very it's actually kind of a fun code to crack, at least from my perspective, sitting behind these algorithms we've built and stuff. Like, it's kind of fun to dig into this stuff and really dig into this stuff with doctors, right? That you're walking through this process. But so that being said, as far as the space and the size of the space and the length of the lease, it all rests on your scope of care and your vision for your practice. For a single doctor practice, routine, maybe some specialty here and there, single doctor practice, 2 lanes, diagnostic suite, private doctor's office. Obviously, you want to have a team lounge. You want to have an environment where your staff can go and kind of have as their private space as a team, right? You're going to have your optical. You're going to have your business office, what have you. Again, single doctor practice, 1,500 to 1,900 square feet, you're golden, right? You dip much below the 1,500 square foot mark, and you're going to run the risk of hitting that capacity pretty early in the process, right? Pretty early post-launch. Flip side of the coin, you start pushing beyond, again, as a single doctor, you start pushing beyond that 1,900 square foot space. And then things in most markets start to get a little pricey for what you would hit within 5 years, right? So that being said, it's a bit of a balancing act. But again, if you're single doctor cold start, routine primary care, maybe a bit of medical, maybe a bit of specialty, what have you, 1,500 to 1,900 square feet, you're going to be golden.
Got
Five-year
it.
lease. Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll finish your thought. I'll jump in.
No, so I was just going to say 5-year lease. Mind you, when you start digging into looking at properties, lease terms are typically written with triple net terms. Now, don't be alarmed. As a matter of fact, listeners, definitely be aware of this, because when you factor in that triple net, it can increase that price per square foot by a pretty healthy bit, and perhaps unexpectedly. So you will want to be sure that's factored into it.
Got it. Got
The
it.
second big thing with the lease.
Can you
Go ahead.
Can you explain what that means for listeners who may not be familiar with that? What is triple net lease? What would entail be included in that?
Triple net, the simplest way to look at it, and don't ask me to go into everything, because look, I'm not a real estate professional. I don't pretend to be a real estate professional, but I'll say this. In my terms, triple net is basically all the extra stuff that you as a tenant are responsible for paying for. So that's going to be like your share of utilities, your share of maintenance, and your share of insurances. Sometimes they tag other things in there, but these are the types of things that when you're looking at a commercial listing, if you're just doing some Googling on your own, looking at commercial listing, you might see, oh, cool, $20 a square foot, but bear in mind, there may be another $7.50 to $9.50 to $10 a square foot of triple net that you're going to want to be sure is factored in there as well.
Got it. Yep, that makes perfect sense. So as you take on that lease, you're taking on some of those other costs that you would hope the owner would be taking on for you. So that makes perfect sense. And as you talk about that, and you talk about this balancing act, there is such an interesting balance between building your year one business, your year one practice versus your year 10 practice, because you're just trying to get in the game. You want to build a business that's actually viable and supports itself and can survive. So there's a balance between just trying to build your year one practice, but also serving your long-term vision for what you have in mind for your practice, because every decision you make, even from the very beginning, takes you in a step somewhere. And you will hope those steps take you closer and closer to that 5 and 10 year vision you have for your practice. But that's such an interesting balancing act between just getting your year one practice in and getting in the game and getting your doors open and surviving, and also serving that long-term vision you have for the practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And dare I say, Evon, it goes back to that starting point. I mean, that's it. I mean, it's the numbers and it's the plan. It all boils down to the numbers and the plan. And there's a lot of great resources, a lot of great places you can go to research kind of how to come up with the numbers, how to come up with the plan. But it all boils down to that. And I suppose that's a key point I really want to encourage listeners to take away. Don't cut corners on the numbers. Don't cut corners on your plan. The more thorough, the more practical, the more realistic, the more centered, right? That is truly in your heart. Don't go into this stuff. Look, if you're wanting to go into a cold start to make a ton of money, I don't know if I'd encourage you to go into a cold start. It's got to be in here. It's got to be in your heart. You got to be living and breathing this. And you can do it. You will do it. Hey, before we leave the real estate piece, there are a couple of other things that I want to toss out there. This is a hot topic. This is a very hot topic, right? So the two other thoughts I want to toss out there. One, definitely get a commercial realtor in your corner. Get them in your corner and press them to negotiate for you everything, right? And look, think of it this way. A lease negotiation is no different from the negotiation on a car purchase. There's going to be the asking price. They are expecting you to give a counter offer, and you guys meet somewhere in the middle. And that's where the value of a commercial realtor really comes into play, right? Reason being is because the negotiation in a commercial lease typically isn't so much on price per square foot, right? They're usually going to be like, they know what that price per square foot is that they want, and they're not going to accept anything less than that, right? But where the negotiation really comes in, and where an experienced commercial realtor can do huge things for your cold start, has to do with how you negotiate. You negotiate around two things. You negotiate around the TI, which is known as tenant improvements, and negotiate around rent abatement during the build out period. So TI, tenant improvements, what is this? For you listeners out there that have never had experience with this stuff, tenant improvements is going to be what the landlord is going to contribute towards your build out, right? So if your build out is going to cost X number of dollars to, again, create this beautiful, lovely space for your new cold start, that landlord will throw money in the game to go towards your build out. That's one of your big negotiating pieces. And if you got a quality experienced realtor in your corner, wow, they can do some really big things on securing you top dollar to go towards your build out. The second key piece when it comes to lease negotiation is rent abatement, right? Again, those landlords typically are not going to want to come off that price per square foot. However, they are going to be interested in throwing you money to go towards your build out, right? From their standpoint, you're improving their space, right? And that second piece regarding rent abatement is where you can negotiate and secure opportunities to get X number of months rent free. And this is where, in working with a commercial realtor, you're going to want to swing for the fences, right? You want to go Babe Ruth style, little baseball analogy there. Go Babe Ruth for full rent abatement until your grand opening. Now, I'm not saying you'll get that, but those are the two big areas on your lease negotiation.
Interesting, because that build out's probably one of the largest portions of the cost.
You nailed it.
Going into this. So
hands down,
if you can get a tenant improvement from the owner, I can just imagine how substantial that can help keep the costs low from the very beginning.
Evon, look, consider this. Okay. Even if you get that landlord, like, so let's take a 1,500 square foot space, which you'll recall I shared was kind of on this. It's a good practical starting point. The reason why I don't say, hey, go for 1,500 square feet is because time and again, I've seen everyone outgrow these things within like 2 or 3 years. Okay. But let's just take, for illustration purposes, let's say 1,500 square feet. And let's say that landlord is going to give you $3 per square foot on your build out. Right. So some simple math, they're going to give you 45 grand on your build out. Now, mind you, that build out may be, it's going to be a big number. It's going to be 160, 180, 200. Okay. But if you get that landlord coughing in 40 grand, maybe 40 and some change, and then you get them to abate your rent until your grand opening, well, now you look at your $5,000 a month rent plus your triple net. Remember, we learned something today, triple net. So take that $5,000, and if they're going to give you 6 months during your build out rent free, that's another $30K. So notice that lease negotiation is going to net you upwards of $70,000 by simply securing $3 per square foot TI and simply securing rent abatement for your build out period. So there's a lot of different things, and I simply toss it out there as examples because there's so many moving parts to these deals, to these projects. If you haven't noticed, I get super geeked up on this stuff. Because
and I could just like there is so much to think about this critically important decision of where to practice and what that location is going to look like, and all of the costs and different decisions and variables that go into that, and the different professionals that you have to help you weigh all these things. From your standpoint, you're helping them weigh how to allocate resources and where to set priorities and all these different decisions. So it is a lot to think about. It's definitely a lot to think about. One last thing I want to ask you about is the launch. You've gone through months of work and thought and detailed decisions and figuring all this stuff out. And you're building up to a launch. What does a successful launch look like?
What does a successful launch look like? Successful launch, that's a loaded question, right? And the reason why I say that's a loaded question is because we're all familiar with this world of metrics. Look, we live in like this data-driven world, like everything is being monitored, there's metrics around everything. Understand that your successful launch is composed of hard results that can be measured in metrics and numbers and analytics, and other soft results that maybe are more difficult to quantify, okay? So a successful launch, when we're looking at hard stuff, is our patients on the books, our patients seeing us and purchasing our full scope of care from us, and then our patients then purchasing the materials and the treatments that we're prescribing to them. Okay, so all of that can be monitored right there in the numbers. Okay, successful launch, yeah. But then there's also this other side of these soft outputs of a successful launch, and these soft outputs have to do with things such as, how is your new team adapting to your practice? How is your new team adopting the standard operating procedures that you have trained them on, because it's how you would like to have your team care for your patients, right? How is the surrounding professional community embracing you as now a practice owner, right? Because remember, when we're talking about launch, I know earlier in the conversation, we were talking a bit about marketing and stuff. Look, one of the big key pieces of the launch is that for listeners, for you all out there that are looking to cold start your practice, look, one of the key pieces of your successful launch is your media kit and you networking in your professional community, right? Connect with internal medicine doctors, connect with OMDs, connect with primary care, pediatrics, connect with dentists, get out there in the community and network, right? So see, these are some of those things that a successful launch, while that type of networking or training your team on the SOPs, or just witnessing that staff culture, that team culture of this little team that you've put together. Because again, it's going to start as a small team. It's going to start probably you as a cold start doctor plus one, maybe two other people, right? We don't want to go on a hiring spree before we have, right out of the blocks. Right. Believe you me, every one of you listeners out there that's looking to cold start, trust me when I say you will have more than enough opportunity just around the bend to start adding to headcount. But that being said, getting back to how do you measure a successful launch? You measure it with the hard outputs, tangible, measurable, quantifiable aspects, but also measure those other milestones, right? Those soft outputs. How is your team getting along with each other? How is your team getting along with you? How are you, as now an owner, and perhaps your first time ever managing and leading people, how are you doing as a leader of your team, right? Like all of these things, they're more subjective, but understand, look for those milestones, look for those daily milestones, right? Because a successful launch is all about those daily milestones. I'll tell you right now, there are going to be times when you launch, there will be times after your launch where you are perhaps wondering, whoa, OMG,
what have I done?
What have I done? Absolutely. It's natural. It's natural,
yep.
Evon, right? It's totally natural. We're all human here. Okay. It's totally natural. And that's where I'll invite you. And if there's one takeaway you take away from this conversation, which Evon, again, this has been awesome, man. Thank you so much for having me on. But if there's one thing I would invite people to take away, celebrate the daily milestones. So if right now you listen to this conversation because you are committed to your cold start and making this happen, hey, celebrate the daily milestones on your path to your cold start. And perhaps right now is not the time for you. Perhaps you're listening to this just because, hey, just want to hear some things. Maybe years down the line it'll be for me. Hey, whatever. And maybe cold start is never for you. Whatever you're doing professionally, if it's cold start, embracing private practice, if it's living out your career serving your patients, serving your community in other capacities. Celebrate the daily milestones. When you start celebrating the daily milestones, you notice that huge things, you're contributing to huge things.
Yeah, there's always opportunity to stress about things going through this journey. There's always opportunities to be anxious about things. There's always opportunities to be overwhelmed. You have to celebrate every success you can.
Absolutely.
To keep your spirits up, to keep the team's spirits up, to keep your mind on why you open the practice and the good that you're doing for your patients, for your community, and for yourself and your family. So absolutely celebrate those successes. And I think that's an excellent place to wrap up here. What are 3 action items, 3 things that ODs can listen to and take action on right now?
If as an audience member, you are looking to cold start your practice, the 3 things I would say, Evon, I think you know where I'm going with this. I think you know where I'm going with this, right? 1, understand your vision. What is the scope of care that you want to provide, right? No 2 people are alike. Your vision is unique to you. Understand that, own that, right? Whether it's a little document you start in your notes on your device and you just kind of add ideas here and there, or whether you have a whiteboard you're writing ideas on, right? Familiarize yourself with what truly speaks to your heart when you're talking about your vision, right? The second piece is you can take that to the next step and take that vision and start to really get some more structure to this vision in the form of starting to create some financial projection. Okay, what would this look like, right? So suppose you as an audience member out there, perhaps you want to open a vision therapy practice. Look, even just some simple calculations on, revenue per patient of those patients you're serving in the practice and patients per day. I mean, it can start with very simple stuff. Like if you want to get into technical calculations, hit us up. We are all about technical algorithms and stuff like that. But it can start very, very simple, right? So if the first key thing for you to do, your first homework assignment is discover that scope of care and that vision that you have. The second is going to be start to put some concrete quantifiables, some concrete blueprints around, okay, what would this like? What would this look like if I were to start embarking on this, right? And the third piece, seek out your peers, right? Seek out your peers. There's a lot of remarkable industry publications out there, right? A lot of really great stuff. What the folks at Jobson are doing, Review of Optometric Business, and that whole world of publications, remarkable resources there. Reach out to your peers across the profession. Look, we live in a day and age, y'all. It's beautiful, this time we live in. We live in this beautiful time where we can connect with someone halfway across the country who may be a total stranger other than the fact that you're both members of the same online community. Engage with people. So it's
incredible. Yep.
Absolutely, Evon,
Yep.
So those are the 3 things, right? As we're wrapping this up, if this is going to be your year, to take the reins and start to plan your cold start with those 3 things. Understand your vision, get that vision on paper and start to draft out a blueprint, and seek out your peers, those who have done it, get some inspiration.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely immerse yourself in your profession, get to know your peers, get to know mentors. Almost every problem you're going to see as a practice owner and as a practitioner has been seen before and has been solved before. So, and another thing is that your peers are really going to understand what you're going through. Your spouse, as supportive as your spouse, if you're married, if you're in a relationship, your partner, girlfriend, boyfriend, family, whoever that other support network is, they're not going to really understand what you're going through as a practitioner or a practice owner, but your peers absolutely will. And I would add, surround yourself with good professionals, legal, tax, real estate. We mentioned commercial real estate, financial advice, accounting. Early and often, get to know a good accountant to help you with your books, and then consulting. Absolutely, if it makes sense for you, evaluate whether using a cold start consultant makes sense. Someone who can help you navigate this whole journey from concept to doors open, and to avoid some of the pitfalls you might not know of until you go through this. And then lastly, to help increase the odds of success and lower that learning curve from the very beginning. So I want to thank you so much, Erich, for joining me here on this show. If I can convince you and twist your arm a little bit, I'll get you back on, because I think there's so much more we can learn from you in all other areas of practice management and growing a private practice. But again, I want to thank you. It's been so much fun.
Hey, Evon, the pleasure was all mine, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. And hey, you keep doing great things as well.
Where can they find you? Where can they start to have a conversation with you and learn about what you're doing at Akrinos?
Hey, y'all can find me, Erich Mattei. I'm on all the socials. Akrinos, we've got a company presence on all the socials. And look, if you wanted to learn more and wanted a bit more direction on this, go to akrinos.com. Pull your copy of our Cold Start ebook. It's called The Practice Launchpad. So it kind of takes some of this that we touched on here and really does a good bit more of a deep dive for you to jump into. So, Evon, again, thank you so very much for having me on. And man, look forward to continuing the conversation next time.
Sounds great. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Want more resources to help master your money? Check out the Education Hub on Evon's website at optometrywealth.com. Evon Mindren is a certified financial planner and owner of Optometry Wealth Advisors, a California registered investment advisor. All opinions of Evon and his guests are their own. This show is for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for specific investment, legal, tax, or other decisions. Clients of OWA may own securities mentioned on this show.